Hello and welcome to Chymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Chymera 2021.
Hello and welcome to Chymera, Scotland's Festival of Science Fiction, Fantasy and Horror Writing. My name is Anne Landman, I'm the festival director, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with our 3 judges for the Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction. The Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction is for our emerging writers in Scotland. It's for people that haven't been published before, and it's open for people aged 14 to whatever. We award it in 2 categories, 14 to 17 and 18 plus. This year, unfortunately, we haven't had any submissions for 14 to 17. We're going to blame that virus, and everything was busy being homeschooled. But we have had some excellent submissions for our 18 plus category. So this is what we're here to talk about. We'll be about an hour. We're going to announce the winner. I'm very excited. We're going to talk about the shortlist. We're going to have a reading of the winning story. And yeah, I'm glad you're all joining us for this. So I have with me our 3 judges, Anne Charnock, Noel Chidwick, and Neil Williamson. And I will introduce them in a moment. Just a few more words about the competition. So we set a theme every year. And this year the theme was Scotland 2030, which is a rather close future and maybe a bit more imminent than we would usually go for. The reason we chose that theme is because we were working with Scotland's Future Forum, which you may not have heard of. Scotland's Future Forum is a think tank which is based out of the Scottish Parliament, and they are independent from the Parliament, but they're based within the Parliament. It's slightly complicated, but they are doing fascinating things and really things that will impact all of us. So we've invited Rob Littlejohn from Scotland's Future Forum to tell us a little more about what they do. So here he comes.
Hello, my name is Rob Littlejohn. I am Head of Business at Scotland's Futures Forum, which is the Scottish Parliament's futures think tank. Our role is to promote long-term thinking within the Parliament and Scotland more generally, and to encourage all those who work in and around the Parliament to look to beyond the electoral horizons to Scotland's long-term future. Our work involves bringing people together and challenging each other's thinkings within events and seminars. We also promote research where possible and work with partners such as Chymera and Shoreline of Infinity to look creatively at what lies ahead for us all within Scotland. You can find out more about our work online and Google Scotland's Futures Forum to find our website, or follow us on Twitter @ScotFutures. We're delighted to be working with Chymera and Shoreline of Infinity and look forward to seeing the results of the work, which we hope to share within Parliament over the coming months. If you are interested, please do get in touch, and we can talk more about what we do. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was brilliant. And thank you again for supporting Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction. Now we're coming to the exciting part of the event. Let me just introduce our judges who spent hours and hours and hours reading the fantastic submissions we've had this year. We had 28 in the category, and they were all brilliant. I'm allowed to say this because I've read them all, and I'm so glad I didn't have to make the decision that they had to make. So let me introduce. First up, we have Anne Charnock. Anne Charnock's writing career began in journalism. Her articles appeared in The Guardian and New Scientist. Her most recent novel, Dreams Before the Start of Time, received the Arthur C. Clarke Award in 2018, and her novella, The Enclave, won the British Science Fiction Association Award in 2017. Anne's debut novel, A Calculated Life, was a finalist for the 2013 Kitschy's Golden Tentacle and Philip K. Dick Awards. She returns to the world of her debut in her most recent novel, Bridge 108, which she's talking about at a Cymera panel later today. Her short stories have appeared in anthologies including 2084 and her essays in The F Word, Foundation and others. She lives on the beautiful Isle of Bute. Then we have Neil Williamson, who lives in Glasgow, and he has published over 60 short stories. Although this bio was written probably about a couple of months ago, so by now he's probably published roughly 70 short stories at the very least. Incredibly prolific. Some of them can be found in his collections, The Ephemera and Secret Language, both of which were shortlisted for the British Fantasy Award. His other books include Nova Scotia, New Scottish Speculative Fiction, which was a finalist for the World Fantasy Award, and The Moon King, which was a runner-up for the PSFA Award and shortlisted for the British Fantasy Robert Oakstock Award. And pulling it all together is our head judge, Noel Chidwick. Noel is the co-founder, editor-in-chief, and editor of Shoreline of Infinity, the science fiction magazine, and other science fictional happenings. He's been reading science fiction since the early 70s and has found no reason to stop. In his spare time, he is a singer-songwriter with Painted Ocean, a writer and occasional playwright, and his favorite hobby is to approach a button and wonder, what happens if I press this, and then press it. More recently, during lockdown, he's embraced video editing and has spent a lot of time bringing the Event Horizon events online, and I recommend you check that out, because that is tonight at 8 o'clock. Thanks again for joining us today at this panel. I always love talking about prizes because I'm always fascinated about how people make decisions about prizes. And ours, I think, is particularly difficult because it's short fiction, and the submissions were only up to 2,000 words. And 2,000 words is not a lot of words, I think, for a short story. So what makes a good short story? Who wants to take that question first? Noel, why don't you go first? You read a lot of short stories for Shoreline.
Yeah, certainly do. Submissions coming in as we speak. What makes a great short story? It's got to be pithy, to the point. Still has to have a story. I still like a story to be a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a personal choice, but I still think that's quite important that the reader goes on a journey with the writer, even for 2,000 words or 1,000 words or 500 words, which makes the task of writing a short story extremely difficult, but an amazing challenge. So I'm always in awe when we get good stories come through both the submissions for the magazine, and as you said earlier, all the stories for the submission of this competition, I thoroughly enjoyed them too. Not really a bad one amongst them, to be honest. So there's still a little journey, a tiny little journey, but a journey nonetheless. For me, still makes a good story, where it's a long, short, or middle-sized one. So when you see a good short story has a story in it, I think that's an amazing piece of work, and I'm in awe of anyone who can do that and make it work so well.
Brilliant. Anne, would you agree?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what I can add to that, and I suppose what I could say is that I think the success of a short story essentially comes down to editing, because a short story has to be precise, and I'm thinking, where does that precision come in, and where do we see the precision in a short story? So we see it partly in the careful choice of words, of nouns, of verbs, just not being as careless as we are in everyday speech, but actually choosing the right word. And then there's also the precision of the telling detail that really puts you into a scene or puts you into a character. So it comes down to that precision of detail. But then a lot of the precision comes down to being fairly ruthless with the cutting, so taking out the redundant phrases and really getting dialogue down to the absolute essentials. And I think if you can get that precision into a short story, then you're well on your way. And I think often, I know when I write a short story, I try to put it away for a few days because it's good to come back to it cold. And then it shouts out, oh, actually that sentence is, you don't want a kind of a duff sentence in a short story. You know, each sentence has to be polished. So for me, a good short story, apart from the subject matter, which Noel alluded to, for me, it's the beauty of line editing.
Neil, do you agree? You're the expert.
Oh, I don't think it's fair to say I'm the expert on. I've just done it a lot. Yeah, I agree with both what both Noel and Anne have been saying. I think there's something really quite magical about a really great short story that can tell an entire story in 2,000 words, as you say, is a very short amount of space. And as Anne says, you've really got to be careful with every single word you choose. So I really admire a story that can tell a complete story in 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 words. That gives me compelling characters that I want to spend the time with. That has well chosen, well crafted prose, and also, and this is really important for me, I don't know anyone else, but from my point of view, I love to discover something I've never seen before in a story, and that can be with science fiction and fantasy. You have all the potential in the universe to come at you, and it's surprising actually the more you read stories, how little variation there can be a lot of the times. There's some very well worn ruts, but when I discover something new, a new idea or a new take on an older idea or existing idea, or something that builds on the ideas I've gone before, I love that. When I discover someone who writes about a familiar subject in a slightly different way, in an imaginative way, in a writing style I've not seen before, I love that as well. So for me, yeah, what those guys said, but also something that makes me just sit up and go, that's great.
So do you think you can be more adventurous in a short story? Because you don't have to spend as much time building a whole world.
I don't know if that's true. I think in the author's head, you can actually spend exactly the same amount of time world building, but only have enough time to put enough on the page that the reader, it conveys to the reader what's all there. Which is to say, on the other side of the coin, that a lot of novelists, when they write science fiction and fantasy novels, and they're doing world building, they only ever think up enough to give the reader the impression that there's an entire world out there. So yeah, it's somewhere in the middle for both of those things, I guess.
I think, sorry.
Yeah. So Nuka, go.
I think there are some kinds of short stories that are difficult to take to novel length. So I'm thinking of if you have a storyline that is quite surreal or weird, it can work as a short story, but it would be difficult to maintain that weirdness for a novel length work.
Yeah.
So short story really lends itself particularly well there.
So it's a bit late for this year's entries, obviously, this question I'm about to ask. But next year, so here's a bit of advice for next year's entries. What advice would you give people that are sitting down to write a short story? No.
Yeah, I think not so much sitting down to write a short story, but once you've written your first story, your short story, and you're now editing it, the first thing to focus on, and the last thing as well, is your first sentence and your first paragraph. I think that's so important to get right and to go back to it until it is right. Because as a reader, both as an editor of the magazine, as a reader, you've got to catch your reader straight away. The first sentence of a couple of sentences is when you grab them and pull them into the story. And you haven't got the space or time to sort of start with what the weather is or what's the view out the window. You've got to get into the story pretty much straight away. But it may often not be the first sentence you write. In fact, probably won't be. One of my favourite writers has written for us, whose name will say off the video for the time being, is a lovely writer, and I always look forward to his stories coming through. But chances are you usually have to sort of remove the first page and still not damage the story. And he's accepted that. Oh yeah. And the writer's story starts on page 2, but his last attempt, it started on halfway down page 1, so he's learning. And that for me probably isn't more an editor's attitude to, I suppose, than maybe a writer's, but I think really the first sentence, first paragraph, you've got to grab your reader and bring them into the story before they realise what's happening. Pull them in by the lapels and get them into it. That's for me, my personal advice.
Okay, Anne?
Well, I totally agree with what Noel's saying about getting that first page, that first paragraph right. You know, when you've got your first draft, it's then deciding, have you started the story at the right place and with the right setting? I think it has to be something that really grabs you emotionally, and I think it's really important to get the characters right in a short story, and not just to have strong characters, but to have nuanced characters. And that's a challenge in just 2,000 or 3,000 words. To not only present somebody that you want to know more about, but to also present them as being complex or being in a complex emotional situation. So character first for me, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about this award is that it's an award for new writers who've not been published before. So if the advice is for someone sitting down to write their first short story, to say to themselves, I fancy having a go at this. I'm going to sit down and write a story. My advice would be just do it. Mm-hmm. Just have an idea in your head and just go ahead and write and see where it goes. Let the story develop. You can have a loose plan in your head about what you'd like to happen. Noel's mentioned the beginning, middle, and end. Where do you want it to end up? What, as Anne's mentioned, the characters. What, start off with an interesting character, and what do you want to happen to them, that sort of thing. But seriously, just get down and enjoy putting words on the page, because that's the way you'll fall in love with it.
Absolutely, that's most important, I think, because both Anne and I are really talking about the editing stage. But yes, write that story. Don't care too much about how good it is. Just write the story so that you've got something then you can then shape and craft and edit till it's right.
Yeah, they do always say it's called a draft for a reason. Don't worry, but you need something to edit, so just put it on the page.
Yes.
So coming to our award, so we had 28 submissions. We whittled it down. Noel and I whittled it down to 14, which we then sent to Neil and Anne, and we set you the challenge of finding our top 3. So a winner and our 2 runners-up. How do you approach when you're asked to judge a competition? You jump right in? Do you think about what you're expecting, or?
No, no, I think what I'm careful about is to be fair to each story. So I don't tend to read them all of them one after the other. So I might read 3 or 4 one day and then 3 or 4 the next, because the last thing I want to do is be reading a story when I'm already flagging a little bit. So it's the main thing for me is to give each story, you know, a fair deal, and just react to it emotionally, and then with a more, you know, critical head on in terms of the story structure and entertainment value and character development. That kind of comes in second. First, it's kind of a more visceral, emotional reaction to the story.
Neil, is it the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, my thing was coming into reading these stories is just be fair to them all. Have an open mind. Don't have any preconceptions. You know, that sort of thing. Bear in mind that they're unpublished writers, so don't get hung up on, I wouldn't have done it that way, that's not the best opening kind of thing. Just enjoy the story for what it is, and then, you know, use other elements, as Anne says, as ways to compare the stories in the shortlist. Yeah, although having said that, I think most of the ones we got to see were really pretty well written, and the ones at the top of our list, I would say, were professional standards. So we got lucky.
We have a fantastic bunch of people writing in Scotland. I think we're just really lucky.
Yeah.
Noel, you got to add?
No, I agree with Anne and Neil. I essentially just approaching the stories as a reader, just as I'm looking forward to reading this collection of stories, and just taking that, and then afterwards maybe when you have to sort of the hard task of peeling away the ones so you can leave some there at the top of this very thin pile in terms of difference to quality. Maybe work out what's true between them, but essentially, as both Neil and Anne said, reading the 14 stories especially, it was very hard to pick between them. But just to enjoy reading the stories, I enjoyed all 14 stories that we came to choose in the end, and that's a great thing.
Sorry. So how hard was it to find that top 3? Was it?
Well, I think there wasn't really any difficulty. There was. We did agree, didn't we?
Did you immediately agree?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we scored. We scored the stories out of 10 individually without talking to each other, and when we brought our scores together, we had. I think we ended up with the top 4 or 5 that would go and look at again. But pretty much the top 3 were the top 3. So it all fell into place. There were 3 stories which both of us felt were considerably just that little bit better than everything else.
Brilliant. I mean, I really enjoyed those. I enjoyed all those stories, but I did like those 3 as well. So maybe we should talk about our shortlist. So we have a shortlist of 3. And maybe we can say a few words about each story, and then Noel will reveal the winner.
Yay!
No, very exciting. Okay, so our first shortlisted story is The Chrysalis by Laura Scotland. Who wants to say a few words about that one? Why it made the shortlist?
Well, I don't mind talking about that one. It's quite an intimate story, and it's about 2 parents who are in a level of conflict over the rearing of their newborn child. And this is happening in the wake of a series of global pandemics of one sort or another. So, you know, it's a timely story, but that wasn't kind of a deciding factor. I very much felt as though I was there in the situation. I felt the author drew me straight in from the first paragraph. And then I felt I was in the room as this discussion was going on, and I was looking between them. And it was emotionally taught and very well edited. And so I would call it would fall into that classification, I suppose, of social science fiction. Very intimate.
Lovely. Anyone got something to...
It did for me. It did what social science fiction should do, and did it very well, which is that it used the heightened tension of this history of disease and possibility of infection to magnify, to focus on the tensions that you get between couples when they have different feelings about how to protect their child and how the child should be raised. And it was a really nicely shaped piece of focused science fiction, and I thought it was very, very effective.
Lovely.
Yeah.
No? Anything?
Well, I'm going to be very careful, because both Anne and Neil have been very careful about not revealing anything of the story. I was more impressed by that skill of explaining how much they enjoyed this story without actually revealing a single element of it. So I'm trying to be very careful.
You could say something about our second shortlisted story, which is, and I apologize in advance for the pronunciation of the author name. I'm really sorry. This story is called The Thief and the Watchdog, and it's by Katja Bacica, or differently pronounced. I apologize, Katja, for mangling your surname. Noel, do you want to say something about that one?
Yes, because I really enjoy this story. It's set in this a time when the oceans of the earth have risen, and Edinburgh is succumbing to this. So Edinburgh came up with the typical Edinburgh solution to the problem, which I loved. The riff that the writer played on sort of the history of Edinburgh itself, and that resonated for me. And bringing it into a harsh perspective into the future. And a little story there is part of it to carry you through how to explain this future. It's all very well saying in the future, this is how Edinburgh will look or could look, but it always comes to life much more so when you throw in a good character in there, a good little story, and a little denouement at the end, which I loved. And Anne says that one of the stories that drew me straight in, I thought, this is a future I can understand. I'm not going to say appreciate, but certainly understand where it's coming from. And it's also a lovely sort of minor key style to it as well, which I also love in a story like this. A little minor key feel to it that sort of raises the emotion, as well as telling this vision of a future Edinburgh. So I loved it.
Anne or Neil, any additions to?
Well, I thought it was a very generous story, and that anyone who spent time in Edinburgh knows it quite well. There are references in there that the reader will really enjoy spotting, you know.
Yeah, for me, I liked the resonance, and when people read this story, they'll understand what I'm saying here. The resonance between the Old Town and New Town history of Edinburgh, because it takes that and kind of magnifies it into kind of again, it's magnification. It's looking at something that's a societal problem or a societal issue in a particular place, and doing what social science fiction does very well, focusing on it by writing it large in a futuristic and strange way. It's very good.
And our third shortlisted story is Saplings by Sophie Charlotte Beaumont. Who wants to say a few words about that one?
Well, I'd be happy to say that I really enjoyed the simplicity of this story, and I really admired how the writer raised issues of sustainability and environmental issues really against a very everyday backdrop, which is a school outing to the countryside. So I just felt that very everyday setting She worked really well with that, or he.
We should say that our judges do not know who's written the stories. They will literally only get the text, so they don't know, they don't get any reference whatsoever about the person behind the story.
Mm. So yes, very believable, a very believable set of characters and a broad range of characters. It was a lively story, and yeah, there's a lot to admire about it.
Lovely. Neil, any?
I had exactly the same response as Anne. I love the characters. It felt to me like the author was maybe a school teacher, primary school teacher, or something like that, who has been observing the children in her class very carefully for a while. That had that kind of sort of vibe to it, because all the characters were there, and they were a joy to spend time with as characters. And had a lovely kind of introspective, environmental kind of message to it as well, which I really enjoyed as well.
Yeah.
No, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure it was written, not only was it written probably by a school teacher, but someone who still remembers what it was like to go on a school trip as a child. Because I was immediately brought back to my school days and to school trips and school outings. I was right in there, age 13, 12 again, I don't know. But yes, it was a lovely story. Lovely story.
Now, I'll bet our audience is desperate, well, to read all those stories, because we've now definitely whetted your appetite. So the two runners-up will be on the Chymera website from later on today, and you can read those. And the winner is published in the new edition of Shoreline of Infinity. So, no. Yeah, ooh.
There's the new issue.
Look at that.
There
It's already ready. Of course it is. Available now.
What do you mean? Today is the 6th of June. Of course it's ready.
Very nice. So you can purchase the new Shoreline of Infinity in ebook or in print from the Shoreline website. The link is in the description to this video. So please do. Fantastic stories, including our winning story. So Noel, will you reveal?
I will indeed. The winner is The Chrysalis by Laura Scotland. And there we go. There's the story in the magazine.
Ooh, congratulations.
So The Chrysalis by Laura Scotland. So well done.
Laura.
Yay!
For those of you that can't immediately access the Shoreline of Infinity, although ebook is available, we are delighted to welcome Debbie Cannon, who is going to read the winning story out for us. Debbie, take it away.
The Chrysalis by Laura Scotland. Edith drifted in and out of sleep. She was curled up on the old leather sofa, enjoying the warm, delicate weight of the baby on her chest. The faint sound of the kitchen radio drifted down the long hallway, and the bright winter sunlight streamed in through the bay window, forming pools of golden light on the wooden floorboards. The baby was 1 week old. If Edith moved too quickly, the dull ache between her legs would quicken to a bright flash of pain. But she was comfortable now, with her knees slightly raised and her head propped up on a cushion so she could see the rowan trees in the front garden. She kept her arms folded protectively around his tiny body while he slept, relishing the tickling flutter of his heartbeat against her chest and the soft wisp of breath on her neck. Tiny white bumps had formed across the bridge of his nose, and his papery skin had taken on an orange tinge. The midwife had assured her that this would disappear in a few weeks' time, along with the funny little folds of his upper ears, still crumpled from the way he'd rested in her womb. She lifted a finger to gently stroke his misshapen ear, then closed her eyes in the sunshine. The sun was good for his skin. It was falling directly onto the sofa, swaddling them both in a pocket of peaceful warmth, and through her lashes, Edith could see the twinkle of damp rowan leaves fluttering in the front garden. Zara would be home soon, but for now, it was just the two of them. She smiled, then closed her eyes and slept. Edith was wakened abruptly by a sharp bang on the window. It was Zara. She was standing next to the rowan trees, peering in from the front garden. Edith smiled at her sleepily, but Zara's brow was creased into an unhappy scowl. She jabbed her finger at Edith, and her head bobbed as if she'd spoken, but the window muffled her voice, and her mouth was hidden by the black respirator covering her lower face. Edith shifted her body and winced at the sudden rip of pain. The baby stirred, and right away she could tell from his tense movements that he was going to cry. His voice flooded the living room just as Zara opened the front door. Edith rose carefully and began gently bobbing him up and down, singing comforting words into the folds of his crumpled ear. Zara's heels tapped loudly on the floorboards as she walked past the living room, and Edith listened as she went into the toilet to wash her hands. She sang and rocked the baby as she waited, then turned as Zara appeared at the living room door, statuesque and beautiful in her long tailored coat and high heels. They regarded one another for a moment, and Edith felt painfully self-conscious of her creased pyjama bottoms and unwashed hair. Zara removed her respirator, but remained in the doorway at an awkward distance. Edith already knew what she was going to say. "Were you sleeping?" It was an accusation rather than a question. Edith continued bobbing the baby, using the movement as an excuse to turn away from Zara's piercing gaze. Her dark blue eyes were startling against her brown skin, like tiny panes of stained glass. Edith and Zara had met in Glasgow Cathedral in 2021. Edith had been restoring one of the remaining Munich windows, and Zara had been viewing the venue with her fiancé. It was before the public mask enforcement laws, when you could still see the faces of strangers. The light of the stained glass on Zara's smoothly sculpted face had taken Edith's breath away, and when Zara noticed her staring, she'd struck up a conversation on Nazir al-Mulk Mosque in Iran. By that time, Edith was already most of the way in love, and before Zara's fiancé had finished drinking tea with the priest, they'd already had an impulsive but deeply spiritual fumble in the lower church. 9 years and 2 global pandemics later, it was hard to believe they'd ever been so reckless. Zara put her respirator down on the lamp table and waited for Edith to answer. Edith continued humming gently until finally the baby began to settle. She felt a small flush of triumph and then turned to Zara. "I closed my eyes for a bit." "Yeah. What's the problem?" "What's the problem?" Zara repeated. "The problem is that the doctor said we shouldn't fall asleep with the baby. He could have slipped off your chest onto the floor and hit his head. Or you could have rolled over and suffocated him. Not to mention all the germs you'll be passing to him. Haven't you been listening to the news today? There were 3 more cases of Iberian measles reported in Fife this morning. Oh, we've talked about this, Edith. He should be in his chrysalis." Edith frowned, then glanced at the white pod in the corner of the room. It was egg-shaped, about the size of a Moses basket, made of smooth white plastic. On the top, there was a touch-screen display next to a small window. Along the side, embossed in flowing script, was the word Chrysalis. A lump formed in Edith's throat, and she rubbed her nose lightly against the top of the baby's soft head. "He doesn't like it in there. He just cries." Zara pressed her lips together. She turned to the pod and selected an option on the display. The seal around the circumference opened with a hiss of trapped air, and the top half slowly opened on a hinge. Inside, the pod was stark white and cushioned, with sensor pads and a panel of softly glowing screens. Zara scrutinised the interior, then closed the lid and scrolled through the readings on the display. There are no faults. All the diagnostics are clear. And it says he's only been inside for 10 minutes today. Zara paused to raise an eyebrow at Edith. He won't get used to it if you keep taking him out every time he cries. Edith looked around Zara's shoulder at the report on the glowing screen, and her chin began to quiver. I know, but I can't help thinking he must be lonely in there. No one touching him or talking to him. Isn't contact meant to be good for babies? Of course it is, but so is keeping him healthy. Remember what the doctor at the Chrysalis clinic said? It can take time for baby to get used to the pod environment, and some individuals acclimatise more quickly than others, but all of them, do you hear me, Edith? All of them do eventually settle in. Babies are remarkably adaptable. Edith fought back tears and nodded as Zara went on. Inside his chrysalis is the only place we can be sure he's safe. It controls temperature and O2 levels. It filters toxins and microplastics from the air. It feeds him when he's hungry, rocks him when he's tired, and monitors his vitals constantly. If he so much as sneezes, it shows up on the daily report. Imagine we'd had this technology 7 years ago. If every newborn had had access to a chrysalis pod where pneumo 10 spread from sub-Saharan Africa, the infant mortality rate would have been 0. 0! Edith? 5,000 babies died in Scotland alone. Yeah, I know, Edith said. And then there was equine flu in 2025. That was a complete shambles. The NHS made the vaccine available too early, and the side effects caused more problems than the actual virus. Edith sighed. She had heard all of this at the Chrysalis clinic when they went for their consultation. She'd had her doubts about the pods then too, but everyone had been so confident and reassuring, and there had been so many statistics to back up what they were saying. Zara had absorbed them all like a sponge. Edith's doubts had been pacified, but once home, her faith in their comforting words had begun to flake away. She turned to Zara reluctantly. But what about getting to know us? How we sound and smell? How we feel? How we feel? Edith shrugged. She was starting to feel a bit foolish. Zara shot her a funny look, then swiped at the controls. Look, if you're worried about the baby getting to know us, there's an option to upload photos and voice clips. You could record yourself singing a lullaby or something like that, and the Chrysalis will play it at nap time. On repeat if you want. All you need to do is program it in. And all of your photos are available too. Just choose what you want. Look, here's one of both of us from our trip to Shiraz. Edith shifted the baby in her arms and looked at the photo on the screen. She and Zara were standing in the mosaic light of the Pink Mosque's famous windows. Their hair and skin were stained a multitude of shining colours. Edith was looking directly at the camera, but Zara's face was turned, smiling at Edith. The lump in her throat returned and her voice cracked as she spoke. I love that one. Zara reached out and gently squeezed the baby's foot. Me too, she said. Edith knew that Zara wasn't really angry. She was worried. Everyone was. She nodded, then turned to the Chrysalis and gently placed the baby inside. He made a series of urgent hiccuping noises and flapped his limbs, but he didn't cry. See, Zara said gently. You'll cry as soon as you close it, Edith replied, wearily. Zara lowered the lid. When the seal engaged, Edith felt her insides thicken and turn to something like cement. She could hear his little chirps and gurgles quicken, and he began to cry, just as she knew he would. But Zara was unfazed. She adjusted the controls to show his vitals, then lowered the volume so that his voice was no more than a whisper of background noise. She looked up at Edith, and her dark blue eyes glinted. Don't look so worried. It's a chrysalis, not some bog-standard NHS nest. He's getting the best start that money can buy. Now, come on. I'm meeting Sandeep for dinner, and you've got that lecture at GSA tonight. Scottish Urban Landscapes in Glass, right? Edith passed her hand over her face. Oh, right. I'd forgotten. You'd forgotten? But you've been preparing for months. Edith shrugged. She was flicking through photos on the Chrysalis display. She swallowed and then managed a weak smile. I am ready for it, really. It's a lot to get used to, you know? A new baby. And life just keeps going on as if nothing's changed. I know it does. But you're doing a great job. You think so? Of course I do. Look, I'm sorry I banged at the window and gave you a row about falling asleep, but work's been a nightmare, and all this change as well. You know, yeah, I know. We're really lucky. You know that, right? If we were in Eastern Europe or America, we would never have been allowed to conceive. We are lucky. Come on, let's go get ready. And don't worry about the baby. I'll drop him off at night nursery on the way to Sandeep's. Don't forget your respirator this time. I don't want another fine. Zara? Yes? Edith was still fidgeting with the controls on the Chrysalis, adjusting the colour of the background lighting from soft pink to yellow and back again. She stopped, then stroked the hard plastic of the window where she could see the baby's face, pinched and scarlet from crying. She scrolled through his vitals on the screen, which all read as normal. Finally, she took a deep breath and then turned away. Nothing.
So that brings us to the end of our event. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction, which is produced in conjunction with Shoreline of Infinity, the award-winning science fiction magazine, and Scotland's Future Forum. Thank you again for the support. And thanks again to Anne Charnock, Neil Williamson and Noel Chidwick for spending their time with us today to talk about the competition and already spending so much time reading our stories. But I don't think it was a hardship.
It wasn't.
From the sound of it.
No, it's absolutely a sheer pleasure, this.
Total pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. And I'm sure I will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.